In the UK, alcohol frequency is down 12% since 2019. The US is similar. Here's a bit of a twist. Gen Z participation is rising within alcohol.
What's most interesting about this statistic is how it correlates with the purchasing power.
As more younger consumers get more money from a purchasing perspective, they will buy more alcohol.
A lot of the younger people who aren't drinking haven't got the same relationship with the big brands that we did.
Socialising is shifting, and actually it's dwarfing the alcohol versus non-alc debate. It feels different because you've got things like buzzball, mocktails, functional sodas, beers, all on the same table, right?
Changes in drinks isn't just about ABV or not ABV. A lot of it for me is about this move towards a sort of ABV agnostic future almost.
It's about experience. People want a really lovely thing in the right time, in the right place for the right experience. Whether it's got alcohol in or not is not as important as it used to be.
The economics is certainly the driver. We can talk about health, we can talk about values, we can talk about social media, but it's economics that is actually the driver of this consumer dynamic situation that we're in.
We begin to see the blurring of the lines where functional drinks will begin to spread across occasions, and we'll see the supermarkets begin to look at occasion and need state rather than here's beer, here's wine, here's soda.
Welcome back to Imme and CPG, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get practical about what really drives growth. I'm Jamie Holton from Haines, and today we're talking about the big one, the future of drinking, and almost by proxy, the future of socialising. This isn't just about less alcohol, less moderation. It's about, I guess, how the act of socialising itself is changing. It's kind of being redesigned, and I guess it feels completely different to what it did even a few years ago. Or is it changing as much as we think it is? We know the headlines say it is, but we're going to try and dig in a little bit to what's going beyond the headlines, and hopefully do some myth busting along the way with some great data as well. You know, it feels different because you've got things like buzzball, mocktails, functional sodas, beers, all on the same table, right? You've got them all speaking the same language, the same codes, the same semiotics, and all kind of trying to tap into similar moments of connection. So the boundaries have really blurred between alcohol, wellness, social life, all of that stuff. There's a lot to unpick, and it's reshaped how brands need to think, which is kind of what we're here for. I've got three brilliant people to help me unpack it. Imme Ergassen, co-founder of Botivo, reimagining what adult drinking can feel like. Nice to have you.
Thank you.
Laura Willoughby, founder of Club Soda, pioneer in mindful drinking and modern social rituals, and potentially our first MBE we've ever had on the show.
Ooh.
Is that right?
I don't know. I don't know who else you've had on the show.
Fair enough. And Luis Osório, head of consumer insights at IWSR, bringing the global data, the trends, and maybe some of that myth busting to the table. So I guess what are we asking today, right? What does it even mean to go for a drink in 2025? What replaces rounds and pubs and pints when everything feels kind of on demand and personal and bespoke and portable to a certain extent? And how can brands, and this is the big question, how can brands create meaning in a culture where kind of connection has started to look pretty different? So let's get into it. The data tells a certain story, right? In the UK, alcohol frequency is down 12% since 2019. The US is similar. Adults who drink have dropped from 72% to 62% over the last 20 years. But here's a bit of a twist. Gen Z participation is rising within alcohol from 46% in 2023 to 70% in 2025. Now, that's obviously driven by as more consumers reach the drinking age. But even in that small portion, that is rising as well. Luis, that is your IWSR data. What's going on?
Yes, so those numbers reflect the consumption in the US. So it's 46% of all and Gen Zs in the US in 2023 were drinking alcohol. And by drinking alcohol, I mean drink at least once in the past 6 months.
Yeah.
It can be a beer, can be wine, can be spirits, at least one drink over the past 6 months, so qualifying to being in the participation rate. And what we've seen is that now in 2025, that value is up to 70. So it's quite significant. The same happening across the globe. So UK 66 to 76, for instance. In Australia, 61 to 83. So that sounds a bit counterintuitive because we were all believing that the Gen Zs were fundamentally different than the previous generations. So we all probably trusted that they will never come back to alcohol. And actually, it doesn't look like they abandon alcohol completely. Now, this doesn't reflect volume consumption, so it reflects participation rate. So it's very important. So it doesn't mean that they are drinking more alcohol per Gen Z. I think what's most interesting about this statistic is how it correlates with the purchasing power. So now in 2025, the oldest Gen Z will be, I believe, 28 years old. And in 2023 was 26 years old. So this is a critical moment in life to start, having the ability to pay for more things, right? Including alcohol bev. So it really tells us that, yes, while the Gen Zs are different, of course, every generation is different because it's different world. Economic moderation seems to have been the main cause for decline.
For the shift, yeah. And I think we'll get on to that, I think, in a moment, because I think it's a really important point to work out what are some of the drivers to understand what's going on. Imme, you've obviously created a brilliant proposition in Botivo that taps into the change we're talking about. What's your view? What's your overview of this shift, this change?
I mean, I think that's interesting. I think the fact that it's about kind of drinking, one drink every 6 months is, for me, the kind of clincher, because I think a lot of the change isn't driven by like total teetotal behavior. It's actually about moderation and people kind of pulling back. And for me, like that's what drives the volume and the excitement and the change within the non-alcoholic space. It's actually not sort of the sober audiences. Yes, of course they exist, but when you look at the growth, I think it's 95% of people that are drinking non-alcoholic drinks are also drinking alcohol mostly. At least for Botivo, that is true. And actually recent studies have showed that as well. I mean, for me, it's a sort of a tricky one, because my thought around all of it is just that culture shifts all the time. We had this sort of revolution in food. A few years ago, suddenly the whole food revolution exploded. People wanted different types of food from different cultures and different types of ingredients and different flavors and nuances. And that hasn't happened in drinks yet. And I feel like that's, there's so many other cultural factors at play, which aren't just about alcohol, not alcohol, which is that people are looking for really interesting new experiences and flavors and tastes. And drinks are now becoming available to them that allow them to have that experience. So for me, a lot of the kind of talk around the changes in drinks isn't just about ABV or no ABV. A lot of it for me is about this move towards a sort of ABV agnostic future almost, where it's about having a repertoire of like really high quality, delicious liquids that have very different flavor profiles, very different techniques, very different experiences built around them, and people having a hunger for that. And in that world, the ABV kind of question is obviously part of it, but it's not the whole thing. It's about kind of diversity of experience.
And you see that in the coffee shops. You see that in KFC launching its Quetch stuff. You also see it in cakes, right? Because if you told me there had been cake shops open till after midnight in the West End when I first moved to London, I'd have thought that was hilarious. Now, we all know sugar's not great for us. We're trying to cut it down, but it has its place in the treat moment and people are going for a really lovely cake. So you're right. It's all about moderation. It's not about cutting everything out. It's about moderation. And then when you do moderate, it's getting the best possible thing you can. So the best looking dessert, or if you are drinking, people are trading up to their best alcohol that maybe costs a bit more, but is the thing that they like the most. And then they're cutting out all of the stuff that was a bit incidental and not very nice. So it's a shift around quality experiences as well as about alcohol not being the star of the show.
How did we get here?
Well, interesting. Well, when I started Club Soda 10 years ago, it was still a point in time when if you asked for an alcohol-free beer in the pub, there was one option. It was in the furthest away fridge. And the bartender would probably go, oh, what? You want something non-alcoholic, like water? And we have moved really, really quickly into a situation where people are very accepting of other people's choices around diet and lifestyle. And that's been driven by the fact that there's been product on the market. So yes, there has been a driver for brands and big brands like Heineken to produce something to meet that demand that they saw was coming over the hill. But then because it's there, it's driven consumer spending and a participation. But it's also been driven by taste. People wouldn't keep going back to these products if they tasted really horrible. And that comes back to Imme's point that it's about experience. People want a really lovely thing in the right time, in the right place for the right experience. Whether it's got alcohol in or not is not as important as it used to be.
But the driver here is economic.
Yes, so that's what the data is telling us now. In terms of alcohol, of course, but I totally agree, because what you've been observing is because you have a first moment of moderation where alcohol companies created no alcohol versions of the same category, right? And after that, you have a second wave where we have all of the functional beverage things with attributes that sort of mimic what alcohol would potentially, what we would feel if you drink alcohol. And I think the adjacent, the functionality, it really blurred the line between no alcohol versions of alcohol beverage. So suddenly you have these whole sort of drinks that people choose from, and alcohol competing with functional waters and all sorts of things that it would be perhaps a bit alien to think about 10 years ago.
So there's a hypothesis, isn't there, that younger consumers, Gen Z in particular, have not learnt the habits of the pub or having a pint of beer, and therefore non-alc versions of beer has a kind of limited amount of volume that it can grow, because younger consumers, why would they drink a non-alc beverage if they're not drinking the alcoholic version? Do you buy into that? Do you think that's are we seeing a kind of plateauing of the non-alc beer?
It's very good, because the typical consumer of no alcohol is the consumer that drinks alcohol, but that will choose to moderate on specific occasions. And actually what no alcohol beer especially allowed was for these people to participate in occasions that probably would have gone home because they didn't want to drink a pint with alcohol beer. So that in a way it's opened a lot these occasions and brought some people to alcohol, which is very interesting.
Every category's got its own little story, and beer's a really interesting one. First of all, the idea that drinking an alcohol-free beer makes you want to drink alcohol is a rumour we need to definitely scotch, because it's alcohol that makes you want to drink alcohol, and it's really important when we come to the future of lobbying in this space that that's understood. But beer is amazing, right? Because once you take alcohol out of beer, it's one of the healthiest things you can drink. So you talk about the growth of functional. Actually, alcohol-free beer is a functional drink. It's, not an ultra-processed food. It's low in calorie. It's 4 ingredients. It's naturally sugar-free, full of vitamin B12 and rehydrating. So it becomes something that can spread across occasions and take from the soda category just as much as it may, replace beer. Yeah. And so people are looking for those natural things that will be of health benefit. And actually, same for Botivo, right? You're naturally low in sugar because of the apple cider vinegar and the way that you steep the ingredients. It's a naturally produced product. So it's got a place in everyone's diet for all sorts of times of day. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we begin to see the blurring of the lines, where functional drinks that you've been talking about will begin to spread across occasions. So, that can of Good Rays isn't just for lunchtime. It's also being used for cocktails in the evening. Mm-hmm. And we'll see the supermarkets begin to look at occasion and need state rather than here's beer, here's wine, here's soda.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Do you think, just thinking about beer, and we'll go on to spirits in a moment, again, the data suggests that Gen Z, younger consumers, are turning away from beer, right? That's what the data suggests.
Doesn't look good on Instagram.
Why is it? Why does that?
Because it doesn't look good on Instagram. It's just factual. It's less exciting than a beautiful cocktail, so it doesn't look that way. I think
so it's an image thing.
So it's an image thing, but also I don't think it's totally true. I think what will happen is taste in beer will change. So that Radler style will start coming through. You've got a generation of young people that have been brought up drinking, eating sweet and sour sweets. So that sour notes, cherry, they're going for peach now. These are clearly a group of people that never got really drunk on Archer schnapps when they were a teenager. Yeah. So, you've got different flavour profiles coming through that might be slightly sweeter. So I think beer does have a place, and we're still seeing it being used a lot. But once you add in the fact that it's functional, then it's got a far greater reach.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, actually, it is the brands are outside of spirits, which maybe are sort of have the biggest danger from young people in terms of like losing their engagement. And that's because, a lot of the younger people who aren't drinking, and that is the generation that are drinking less, haven't got the same relationship with the big brands that we did when we were growing up. And I think the danger is that we assume that, or the big, whatever, Diageo's, Bacardi's, etc., assume that a 0% version of their brands is going to be enough to engage a generation that is drinking less. And the reality is they haven't got that same emotional engagement with it. They didn't grow up with it. They haven't got the years of getting into their brains and telling them it's a lifestyle brand, although it's really interesting. And actually it's the new brands that are born within the same generation as them, and which they kind of grew up with, that will be the ones that will resonate with them as they get older.
And also because alcohol is not allowed on social media in the same way. So, alcohol-free brands have managed to corner that space, but Gordon Zero, because it shares branding with its parent, has huge numbers of restrictions on it. So whilst they might have a product on the market,
they can't talk about it,
they can't talk about it in the same way. And those restrictions will keep coming.
Imme, you made a really good point there about insurgent brands, smaller brands, being able to connect with younger consumers and perhaps better than some of their kind of bigger counterparts. Why is that? Just unpicking that from a brand perspective. Botivo, for instance, it feels culturally attuned, it feels connected to what consumers want. How have you been able to do that where, clearly the likes of Diageo, Bacardi have struggled?
I mean, that's a multi-layered, there's a multi-layered answer.
That's always a startup versus big business discussion.
I think one of the key things that for me is, and this is something that Laura might have something to say, and you might disagree with me on this, but I think one of the things that for me, so my background is brand building, and I think one of the things for me that I've always found challenging about the non-alcoholic space, and particularly the non-alcoholic spirits, is that there's a lack of authentic stories. And what I mean by that is, when I worked in, premium whiskies or premium gins, whatever it might be in my past life, like it was the stories of like the founder or the processes or the place or the ingredients and that those kind of stories which you're able to kind of put out there as kind of authentic stories for consumers to kind of build emotional engagement around. And for me, I think what's lacking in the non-alcoholic space in general is there's a lack of like makers, there's a lack of like super craft that people can show. A lot of it is still outsourced to factories or fragrance houses, particularly from the big brands. And there's a lack of, like, this is where we make it, this is what goes into it, like pulling back the curtain and showing kind of what goes into it. And that means that there aren't those kind of emotional stories that a lot of consumers can buy into and feel really kind of emotional about. And for me, small brands are able to show, look, for us, for example, my co-founder, Sam, he hand makes every bottle on Lannick Farm. Lannick Farm is a place in Hertfordshire. There's like multiple other cottage industries on the farm. We take trade there, we take consumers there, and they're able to really kind of buy into those authentic stories. And for me, the one thing that is still lacking from our space are those authentic stories. And I think when you do have those craft credentials and that ability to kind of pull back the curtain and show people, those parts, that's really engaging, particularly for young people, because for them, transparency and authenticity is even more important than for our generation, because they've been brought up, as Laura said, in this whole world of show me everything, like take me behind the scenes, like, what's going on.
Interesting you say that. We did a very big project a while ago now, which was the future of Scotch. And it was around why aren't young consumers drinking Scottish whiskey. And a big part of that was they felt like they wanted to own their own rituals and wanted to own their own kind of knowledge around their certain drinks that they drunk. And it felt like whiskey was owned by another generation. And that's exactly what you're saying, right? Those brilliant Scottish whiskies have these amazing craft stories and provenance stories, etc. But if you look at non-alc, some of them feel a bit scientific, don't they? Because a lot of them has almost propositioned as we've taken that out.
100%. And that generation, like they want to be taken somewhere and be like, this is who makes it. This is what goes into it. Like, come into our world. Like, let's show you it. This is why it costs so much. And you can actually see why it costs so much. And if actually you're not able to show them that, and it's just a bottle and a liquid that's been made somewhere that they don't understand how it's made or what goes into it or where it's made, that for a generation that is absolutely used to hyper transparency is very difficult, I think, to grasp. And so, I think my advice to sort of, for non-alcoholic drinks brands, what we need to do more of is to show people what goes into it and the actual craft around it, because there is so much within the new generation of non-alcoholic drinks, which Laura knows more than anyone.
Yeah, Laura, what do you think?
Well,
you're seeing that at Club
if you
Soda?
think about it, we're at really early days in the sector, right? So this, when I set up Club Soda, I didn't realise that people were already cutting down drinking.
Can you just give us 30 seconds of what Club Soda is?
Oh, well, I guess the best way to describe this is we're an advocacy movement for low and no alcohol drinks. And that's because I set up Club Soda to help people change their drinking. We discovered that there wasn't anything for them to drink 10 years ago. So we did a big report called Nudging Pubs back in 2015, where we started talking about this. We identified there were no drinks on the market. Then when they started to arrive, we did the festival. and now the shop. And I've got a campaigning background, so I also started to look at where all the legislative hurdles were and where all the changes in society need to happen, the way that hospitality works or the way that we do things through distribution that get in the way of greater adoption. For me, I want to make mindful drinking easier for everybody. And so it's not about taking alcohol away, it's about introducing choice. And therefore, basically, we're leaning into one very particular behaviour change technique that helps people reduce how much alcohol they drink, which is swapping an alcoholic drink for an alcohol-free one, or for that matter, a mid-strength one. So we also coordinate the mid-strength collective. So they're all part of that same consumer behaviour. And I'm really interested in how there are roadblocks in the way for brands like Imme's, because, you know, hospitality's always worked this way and it just doesn't have room to think about it or that sort of thing, or that the government has screwed up the labelling and descriptor stuff time and time again, which makes things really difficult. So I like that advocacy piece because I believe that's where change happens.
Nice. Okay. And you made a few points there about choice, which is really interesting. Again, looking at Luis, your data, I think 61% of younger generations said they practice intermittent abstinence versus 39% of the general population, right? Like, and that is a kind of point about choicefulness. I think also I saw some, from a data perspective as well, the variety of drinks in any given bar, right? So that's increased. And what you might then see is you might see a group of 4 or 5 people and they all have different drinks, right? They might have an Aperol, a mocktail, a non-out beer, a rosé, a trip, whatever. You didn't see that 4 or 5 years ago. Is that what you're talking about? Almost kind of individual choice?
Yeah, and because more customers are looking at menus before they go to a venue.
Yeah.
And if they're going out in a group, they will look at a venue in advance to check it's got a vegan option for their vegan friend, and maybe a gluten-free option for their gluten-free friend, and an alcohol-free option for their alcohol-free friend. All the venues that are doing best with alcohol-free tell us it has increased their group bookings, particularly around Christmas, for example. So people are more mindful that they want everybody in their group to have a good time. It's not like when we were younger where, you know, you just went to the pub and that was it. It was vertical drinking and you couldn't even, like when I was a teenager and beyond, you wouldn't even be able to get food in a pub. You wouldn't go to a pub now and there not be an interesting food offer. So people are really keen that they want everybody to have a good time in their group, and they will check in advance. And so if you don't have that choice front and center and show that you're going to give them an equality of experience, and that's what I'm always after. Coke from a hose is not fun night out in anybody's book. You want to give them an equality of experience, and that's what they're looking for. And so when you speak to Sexy Fish, they will tell you 40% of their sales of alcohol, of cocktails are alcohol free, right? Okay.
And we're going to come back to what might be a London bubble in a moment.
Yeah.
But we just on that as well, because I think the whole premise of, so for me, when I look at I guess what frustrates me about the non-alcoholic movement in general, or the way that we talk about drinking, is there still are these kind of forced tribes. It's like the moderators, the teetotalers, like the abstainers, like whatever it might be. There's so many kind of ways in which we kind of talk about drinkers, non-drinkers, moderators, etc. segments. And actually, to Laura's point, I think the most important thing is inclusivity, right? And it's choice. And actually with Botivo, our whole brand and the strategy and what I created it around was based around that concept, because our dream isn't to have a Botivo on the table and like drinkers are drinking alcohol and everyone else is drinking Botivo. It's that there's a Botivo on the table and everyone's drinking it, but some with alcohol and some without alcohol.
Yeah, okay.
So the kind of proposition behind Botivo is that you can drink it with or without alcohol. Like 25% of our customers drink it with alcohol in their homes. They use it with gin or they use it with, mezcal, etc. So for me, that is going a step further and being like, actually, everyone can be drinking the same thing. Some with alcohol, some without alcohol. There's going to be no discussion around what are they doing? Are they drinking? Are they not drinking? Which is still such a barrier.
It is difficult,
right?
Because words like sober have got a very defined meaning and of clear identity for some people. But when you come to moderation, you've got a whole host of behaviours that include some people who will just take 3 nights off a week from drinking, all the way through to people I know, like my partner, who might have half a craft beer a week, to some people who are alcohol-free by default, but might just have something to drink during special occasions or when it's offered. And so the moderators are not just one homogenous group with one behaviour. There's a lot of stuff going on and people are making those decisions based on other things going on in their lives. So I always say that what hospitality forgets is that people are using now part of their brain that spends a fortune in Holland and Barrett as well. They're going, right, I've spent a load of money on a gym. I've bought all these supplements to make myself healthier. I've got all those sorts of things. Now, tonight is a night where I want to be healthier. And therefore, I'm going to make this decision about this drink using the decision matrix that I would use when I go to a health food shop, rather than the decision matrix I use when I know I'm going to go out clubbing and drink a bit too much.
Yeah. And it opens up, what's your competitive set, right? Like it starts to be quite interesting. And just help me get to a cultural place here, right? Let's go up top. What does that choice stuff, does that say something about like how individualism is shifting? Because, when I think you just said it, Laura, but 10 years ago, particularly if you're a bloke, you go to the pub and you don't have a choice, or you have to have a beer. That's what was the kind of social norms, and you had to kind of push against that if you didn't want to do that. And there were kind of social structures and social norms. They are dissipating around what you should be drinking, and you can choose what you want for and what works for you that day, that moment, that occasion. Is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing a kind of fundamental shift in kind of individualism to say, well, today I will not drink alcohol because tomorrow I've got the gym or whatever? And the kind of choice paradox is almost being driven by this shift in individualism, a shift in choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that one way of looking about it, and the way of describing it, is people going like, it's a non-alcoholic drinking or a alcoholic drinking like choice. And that's the kind of main thing they're thinking about. For me, where we're heading is not actually that thought process. It's like I come back from work and I don't go, oh, I want a glass of wine. Oh, damn it, I'm going to have a Botivo. I come back from work and I'm like, God, I really want a Botivo. And I think for me, that's where things are heading. It's less about, oh, this is my non-drinking night, this is my drinking night, this is my drinking night. And it's much more like, what do I really fancy? What quality drink do I really want in this moment when I'm in the pub? And I think one of the things that sort of bothers me, and I think, Laura, you work quite a lot towards this as well, is from what I understand, is in menus, for example, it's always like non-alcoholic here and alcoholic over here. And it doesn't have to be that way, right? I think you can have a 0% option in the aperitif section or whatever it might be, so that people aren't like, aren't going, okay, this is a non-drinking moment, so I have to go to the non-drinking part of the section. I think they should just be like, wow, I want something delicious. Look down the menu. These things are all delicious. That one happens not to have booze. Don't care. Whatever, it's delicious. And I think for me, that for me is the shift that will be happening. Is that kind of combination of stuff and people.
It'll take a while because people, at the end of the day, when you go into a venue, for most people, and particularly when you're outside of urban areas, your assumption is that choice is terrible. You're going to have a choice of a Coke or maybe a J2O. And if you're lucky, they've made it adult but put glitter in it. Then I don't understand. So your expectations are already really low. So you have to work hard to show that you've thought about them as a customer and put it in a separate space so that people understand and people know. Because we're still at really, really early days of this being a sector. But, we also have to know that alongside all of this is coming the lower ABV products. Yeah. People's understanding of ABV isn't particularly good, but they do know they want things lower in strength. We see that in wine and we see that in cocktails. Yeah. And so you can go to venues now and they will have a mid-strength cocktail list. And so we sort of need to present it to the consumer and say, look, we know that you're trying to drink a bit less. So we now have these options for you. But because we know that you're not expecting them because expectations of hospitality are low, we've presented them to you. And for me, that's really important because the reason why I wanted to set up Club Soda was I didn't want people to absent themselves from a pub or bar if they decided they weren't going to drink. Yeah. Because assumptions are, in a very alcohol-centric country, that if you go into the pub, you're going to have to get smashed or at least to have alcohol. And I want us to go, no, it's okay. We're going to keep our pubs alive and thriving and our bars alive and thriving because there's something for everybody and the reason to come through the door.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful.
Well, for example, for the mid-strength cocktail you're talking about, would you put that in a mid-strength section? Because for me, that would go with cocktails and it's just an option there.
Yeah, I think it can depend. I think, if you look at Sexy Fish, they do the same cocktail, but 3 ways, different strength. You do need to guide the consumer. They don't really understand ABV. So when I told somebody the strength of a Negroni the other day, they nearly fell off their chair. And I said, I think it's around 40. It's 40% because you've got 40% proof spirits in it. So half of your drink is made up of alcohol, and then it's a short drink as well. So people are beginning to understand a little bit more, and in the same way as they're looking at nutrition on the back of all sorts of packets and labels, they will begin to do that with alcohol. Now, and also nutrition labelling is likely to come on the back of alcohol, which alcohol-free has to do anyway. But that is surely going to come very soon. So we'll end up with having a more informed consumer.
Yeah, and a couple of things I want to touch on that. I think you said, we're at the start of this movement. It's still small globally. It's only 1 to 1.5%, right, versus alcohol, and it's I think it's meant to get to 5%, 3 to 5% in 2030. So we're talking pretty small, but a very kind of noisy growth and a noisy kind of minority. But what's really interesting is when you start to look at occasions, and Luis, you've got some great data on this. We're drinking earlier, aren't we, as a nation in particular?
Yes. So that's particularly true in the UK, but in other markets as well. So you see the consumer shifting from the late night drinking into the brunch occasion. So that's probably the best
Which is
metaphor.
Amazing why the government says they want to now allow licensing to be later when the data doesn't show any of that.
Don't even get me started on the government. I'm honestly like what they're doing in hospitality is just breaking my heart, and it's like
with all the pubs closing as well.
So your data says 3 to 4 p.m. is now more popular than 9 to 10 p.m. right?
Oh, I don't know if it's more popular, but it's increasing in terms of popularity.
Okay, why people aren't working at 3 to 4 p.m. is another matter. But
it's more of a weekend.
Don't forget, most people still drink at home, so it's quite possible.
Let's not get into British productivity. But what does that signal? Brunch, one of the fastest growing moments. I mean, it just sounds like everyone's drinking earlier here. Gin with your Weetabix starting to be normalised. But what's that all telling us?
I mean, it's a consequence of everything we're observing, right? The emergence of the light and fresh. You've seen that for the past 15 years with Prosecco and cocktails and all of that. Instagram mobile moments. So brunch is ideal for that. Moderation. You drink less if you drink during the day than you do during the night. It's typically more affordable as well. So typically drinks in a club will be more expensive than drinks in that setting. So it also goes well along with moderation in terms of purchasing power. And then you see also a fantastic job from the brand owners doing, putting nice value propositions in the market. The emergence of a really nice cocktail experience that were not there maybe 5-10 years ago, like the spritz craze. It's relatively recent, right? So it really goes well along these lines. So I think the brunch is the crystallization of everything we've been observing.
It's right? And that's what I hear from younger people as well. So we talk about moderation. I hear them going, I've booked all of these things to do over the weekend. I've booked paddleboarding on Saturday, and I've booked a brunch on Sunday. So I'm not going to drink too much in the, at night, because otherwise I won't get to these things that I've booked. Theatre, the West End in the UK is the busiest it's ever been. It's bigger than Broadway. And that's because people are turning up to jukebox musicals. They're an event. They're a night out. And people aren't going to go, oh, well, I'm too hungover. I'm not going to turn up to this thing that I've booked. Young people want to turn up to the thing that they've paid for because they've paid for it. So they're price sensitive.
And I think also even like on a broader sense, like, as the role of alcohol for some people becomes less important. Actually, what we're seeing is in hospitality is the rise of like experience-led venues, right? Like all the data is showing like where young people are able to actually kind of do something or connect around something. It doesn't necessarily have to be alcohol. It can be, but it can also be something else. And so it's about this whole next generation of kind of hospitality having to think about if there is going to be a behavior change, which there is, and all the evidence shows it. What are we doing as hospitality, or what are the venues doing to evolve and make sure that they're creating something which talks to a younger consumer? Because it's all very well for us to be like the government's, really like, the government is, the VAT needs to be slashed. There needs to be a Minister of Hospitality. Like everyone is, struggling to keep the lights on. But at the same time, we also need to innovate and create experiences that young people want to use, so that they continue going to the pub and they continue going to those spaces.
100%. Because you mentioned before need states. I love need states because I think it defines everything that ends up happening in markets. I think it's fair to say that traditionally the need states of alcohol would be all about relaxation, celebration, socializing, connect. It's still pretty much true.
Yeah, relax and unwind is the biggest one.
It's very alcohol type of
the original
needs, right?
functional ingredient, alcohol.
Exactly.
To be fair.
Exactly.
It's functionality.
Yeah,
and
it does
it's
the
purest
job.
sense. But what we've been seeing, and this is consumer data tracking when we track throughout the years, is the rise of new need states, things like exploration or impress. So what does this tell about me to my social media followers or to the friends I'm giving this fancy bottle, or even reward? So I think you mentioned get home and like, this is my moment, I'm going to reward myself. You see these people drink less perhaps, but then there's these very specific moments they will, I'm going to treat myself too. I think that comes a bit from the pandemic. The pandemic really created this. We called back then the home premise, which is how your house starts being.
It's that sort of music to my ears, because when I think about sort of all the thinking that went into the creation of Botivo, I think, when alcohol is taken out of the picture, I think one of the things that you do need to do as a brand and as a product is work harder to create really interesting and experiences around the unboxing, around the packaging, around the ritual, around the drinks making, because actually, particularly in like the sort of spirits world, for me, spirits and alcohol aren't just about a beer. It's not just, with beers, you have a beer, you drink it, that's sort of how the ritual around beers, right? It's your friendship and hanging out in the pub. But with spirits and alcoholic spirits, there's so much more to it. So there is, slicing the lemon, there's putting the mixer in, there's putting, whatever, a little cocktail umbrella if you want to on it. Yeah. And there's so much ritual around it. Yeah. And in some ways, like removing the alcohol from that, means that you have to add even more, place even more value on the experience. And, every single detail about Botivo when we created it was all about demarcating this moment and creating a ritual around it. So everything from like undoing the wax to, the serve being with an orange slice and then mixing it. And then, our occasion, which is something that we call the yellow hour, which is a play on, that aperitivo moment in the golden hour. And I think like playing to that idea of, reward, needs to be dialed up even more in the way that you create the brand and the product experience when there's an absence of alcohol there.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, and particularly at home consumption in particular is rising again. It's up still significantly post COVID. Huge driver again is economic, right? It's expensive to go out. But you're starting to see, to your point, you're starting to see brands lean in and create those at home experiences that feel premium, ritualized, all of that. But interesting, just on that, what we're also seeing in the data is a rise of solo drinking. Me time occasion is increasing quite significantly. Why is that?
I've seen some data that then you can derive some conclusions, but it's more qualitative. So when you speak to consumers in focus groups and interviews, and tells us that it looks like the consumption occasion is becoming more special in a way. It's either at home alone or even in a brunch. So there's more effort in planning that. There'll be a bit more budget available for a specific drink. But there's also a bit of a polarization, which is those occasions are either very special or very casual at home. So not sure about at home in terms of.
I think for me, actually, the reason, one of the drivers of kind of more me time occasions is the idea around individualism. Is I know what I want.
I mean, I 100%. I was actually talking to someone about this the other day, because I think it's a huge cultural shift. Yes. This idea of like, these are my boundaries. I'm doing this for me. Don't make me do something I don't want to do. And I think like what we're seeing in a lot of really young people when we talk to them are, there's a lot of, even if you look at social media, right, there's a lot of, it's okay to say no, or like, if your friends want you to come out, like respect your own boundaries, like listen to your body, listen to your brain, like what do you want to do? And that's created this culture, which is a lot more around me time's really, really important, and actually having boundaries and like, leaving other people to it and taking time for myself is really important.
We come from a country where we've been taught to stay at things we're not enjoying by drinking. And that's sort of going very quickly. It's bonkers, right? You should just go home and sort of get drunk. But I do worry that people might be drinking at home alone, alcohol. That sets some little alarm bells for me as well. And people dealing with feeling lonely, because people do feel quite isolated in a very tech world. So it's also that is also a little alarm bell for me. But we talk a lot about young people, and I think there's been some really interesting cross-generational stuff. So first of all, it's not all young people that are drinking less. I'm the ladette generation. We're the biggest drinking generation of women there's been, all hitting menopause right now. And everyone I know in that age demographic is giving up drinking. You know, the queen of menopause, Davina, has told everybody that that's the way it should be. So
it's our biggest consumer.
Yeah, and so you've got a huge number of people shifting, but they've also learned from younger people something that we also weren't taught when we were younger, which is alcohol doesn't help anxiety, it makes it worse. And so you've got a lot of intergenerational learning that's come from social media that was never there before. That whole idea around consent and doing the things that you want to do and looking after each other and being friendly rather than being what could have been, when we were younger, quite aggressive in the pub. If you weren't drinking, you were boring and people would question it and ask you why not. That idea that this is your choice now and it's not up, you know, you shouldn't pry into people's choices. That's been a really, really quick shift in this last 5 years.
But I also do think like sometimes that, you know, when there's all this stuff on social media, all these memes and stuff being like, you know, if you don't want to go out, say no, or like, you know, don't. Actually, sometimes I just think, say yes and go out and see your mates. Like, that's the other thing that I think sometimes, like, you know, we see is people going, I'm feeling a bit low. Oh, I can't bother to see my mates. Or everyone on the internet is telling me to respect my boundaries and it's okay to say no. But actually,
just get out there.
Sometimes get out there and meet your mates for a drink.
What's
and it's actually really fun.
That can happen?
Yeah, and I think, you know, and like those kind of memes, those kind of cultural narratives on socials are also stop people from going out, right? Yeah. And I think actually the reality is if you go out and you do go to the pub, whether you drink or not, you're probably going to have a better night than if you're staying at home by yourself.
Yeah.
And
those new social norms can be created, which are actually just as negative, right?
We need to get people out. We don't need to keep people in.
But the data does show that people are drinking less, so when they are out, their social interactions are better, and social interactions are really important.
And more special than.
Special. So we've got a couple of things going on, which is people protecting boundaries, maybe spending more time at home, but we do know that they value going out, socialising, connecting with other people in a meaningful way.
One question is about hedonism. Now, Imme, your aspirational design target for Botivo is the hedonist. Reconcile that with a non-alc aperitivo. How do you go after joy? How do you go after hedonism in the way that you're doing?
So, I mean, I guess there's a few things. So I have a background in sort of brand building, consumer work, I guess a lot like you. And I think for me, I just know the insight that so many of these non-alcoholic brands were built around. And it's the idea of going out to consumer, talking to them, and they go, oh, I'm moderating. And the brand's gone, great, we're going to create a brand that's about moderation because that's the consumer need. I'm going to create a brand around that. And for me, that feels like a missed opportunity because actually, if I've already decided to moderate, I don't then want to be told by a brand to moderate again. I want to be told something really exciting and emotional that I can really connect with. So from the beginning, you know, we position Botivo as a pleasure brand, right? And the idea behind it is, you know, our consumers aren't actually moderators, right? We've got a very specific target consumer, and that's not someone who's necessarily into health and wellness. It's not necessarily someone who's counting calories. It's not necessarily someone, you know, where health is the biggest driver. In fact, 84% of people that drink Botivo said taste is the number one reason why they come to it. And we've built the whole brand around that specific consumer, which is quite a different brand from, say, some of our competitors that will build it around a kind of moderator. And that is about telling the right stories for that consumer. So we're a super craft product. You know, it takes a year to make. There's no flavorings. There's no preservatives. Like, it's actually like fresh, raw ingredients. And also, from a brand point of view, you know, we have this dual founder story where Sam, my co-founder, is a kind of artisan who makes it meticulously. And I am actually a hedonist, and I still am. Like, I actually don't really drink like non-alcoholic drinks very much. I love Botivo and I love alcohol, and I drink a few other drinks, but I'm still very much like in that kind of pleasure-seeking world. And I really enjoy the complexity of alcohol, and I actually do really enjoy getting pissed. But I just really enjoy Botivo, and I really enjoy sort of delicious food and delicious drinks and pleasure seeking, and hedonism doesn't always have to be alcohol or drugs.
It's not polarizing, is it?
No,
it's
hedonism can just be enjoying life, right?
And
high quality things.
And it's right, because when I talk to people who are looking to change their drinking because they're worried about it, the first thing they say is, well, you know, I'm worried about, you know, that I'm not going to go clubbing anymore. And then I point out to them that they're in their mid to late 40s, and the chances are they haven't been clubbing for a while. But that's not what people think about. They think about those occasions when they did, and they still want to know that they are still possible.
Holding on.
And they're holding on to them. And so you're right. They want to be propositioned that this is part of a lifestyle where they are living life to the full. So hedonists may not be the right word, but they are wanting to cram more into their weekends. They're wanting to go and do that really interesting, thing like, go outdoor swimming and then sit in a sauna for 2 hours. One of my favorite things, which feels like you're living life to its maximum and that you're not.
It goes up to the experience.
And then you'll do something in the afternoon, which is a bit different. And then something in the evening that's a bit different again, which has got some interesting food and has got a place for some loud music. So it's all of those things.
The whole realm of it is expanded. But also hedonism isn't just about the amplification of pleasure. It's also about the reduction of pain, right? That's what the definition of it is. And so it kind of does play the non-alcoholic world quite well, because actually you can have these really rich flavor, quality, connection experiences, not drinking. And then actually you don't have much pain because there's no hangover. There's
no.
It's actually in a way it does fit very nicely.
I think it's really interesting. I think, again, just a bit of grounding us in reality, right? 64% of consumers say they're spending less on alcohol because of cost. Premium non-alcs are expensive. The Botivo is £27.50
for 20 drinks though. So it's actually £1.30 a drink.
Yeah, you answered that very quickly.
Well, only because we get that a lot, and actually,
I get it.
But it is actually way cheaper.
You talking about the craft and all that. It takes a year to. I completely buy it. But all I'm saying is, from a consumer perspective, a bottle of Gordon's, a bottle of Tanqueray are comparable in their frame of reference at the moment. They are comparable. So, and also what we're talking about here is a kind of London-centric, urban-centric mentality, right? Like, so how do we, I guess, you guys are pioneers of the movement, particularly you two. How do you get it out of the M25?
I mean, just to jump in on that, because we've been getting this pushback so much about, is it a London thing? And I think buyers and stuff would really push back against us in the beginning. And I think the more Botivo grows, the more evidence we have data-wise that it's not just a London thing. I'll give you an example. We have one group that we have a single drink on a menu of a group that's all outside London, 19 sites as a restaurant. They are on track to do £315,000 this year just from one Botivo drink on their menu. And that is all outside London,
and the Majestic as well. Majestic's at 212 locations across the UK, lots of them in very small, out of the way places, because a lot of them are drive to with car parks. It's amazing how it's performing there as well. So it's definitely beyond that. I think alcohol-free will always have an issue because we overvalue alcohol, because the alcohol's a free part of your alcoholic drink. It's a lot cheaper to make than people realise. We pay more for a drink if it's in a fancier bottle and a heavier bottle, regardless of what the liquid is inside it. And that's generations of cultural hardwiring to give value to alcohol because of the effect that it gives you. And I think it'll be really difficult to counter that. Now, the government could do some things to support alcohol-free, like take VAT off alcohol-free, which is something I've wanted for a long time. And as popularity grows, we'll have some more economies of scale. But we overvalue alcohol, and I think that will always make it very difficult to make the comparison. That's why functional drinks do particularly well. Functional drinks also have the fact that they contain ingredients that the more regularly you partake in them, the more benefits you have, and so that also increases people's regularity of purchase of those drinks. So,
but I think also if we can start to show more about the processes and the ingredients and all those elements that go into non-alcoholic drinks, then it would make more sense. I think at the moment the non-alcoholic space is so shrouded in mystery. Yeah. And often it's just it's got a bottle and it's got a liquid inside it, and people are like, this is £30. And people are like, what? I don't understand. And so it's about
whenever I do the tastings at Majestic, it's about talking about the fact that Paul Matthew goes out and chooses the cherry blossom for Everleaf, and the way that you make your product, and the fact that SciShow uses, I could talk about tea for a long time, but uses absolutely beautiful hand-picked teas in its base and so on. So they're, those stories that have worked really hard. The fact you've got wines now coming through where they're working with particular grape varietals with a particular vineyard.
What was that that delicious? My favourite one I've ever tasted that you gave me, which is the Pear German winery.
Oh, so your Geiger, who
so good.
I mean, if you want to look at provenance, he's bringing back heritage fruits. He's been going for 20 years. He's working with 350 local farmers to grow heritage fruits to to make his drinks in Germany. He's very well established in Germany. His products are sold in 85% of the Michelin-starred restaurants in Germany.
It's insane.
The man's a genius. You need to meet him at the conference next week because he's something amazing.
I imagine that's quite an expensive drink.
Yes, but he has stuff across every price point, and the section of your Geiger products in the supermarket is bigger than the whole of the alcohol-free section 4 times over in the UK. So, you know,
from an inclusivity, you mentioned the word inclusivity earlier, right? You want this to be inclusive.
Yeah.
Irrespective of how many drinks you get out of it, spending 30 quid on a bottle of anything is a lot.
Yeah.
RTDs are being seen as a kind of engine of accessibility and an engine of growth.
Good, because we just launched one.
Talk to us about that launch RTD coming. Why do you think you've got? What's the reason into going into RTD?
Well, there was a super strategic reason.
Did you see some IWSR data?
It actually was nothing to do with RT data, surprisingly. But it was actually to do with, there's multiple things to it. One is, when I look at the people that engage with our brand and the people that buy the bottle format, there was a sort of mismatch, right? So if you look at our socials, 75% of people that follow us are like 20 to 40. And if you look at our people that are buying the bottle format, it's the other way around, 40 to 60 or 75%. So what we were realizing was there was a lot of people deeply engaged with the brand because it's a really kind of fun brand that they connect with. But the format of a bottle where you have fizzy water and an orange in your fridge and like a drinks cabinet is just not something which most people 20 to 40 have at home. In fact, I barely have it. I barely have milk in mine. So it basically was like, okay, we know the brand and the product really resonates. Because also we spoke to bars and pubs, and the rate of sale is really high in spaces where young people hang out. So that was the first thing, was like, let's create a format which fits the young people's, like lifestyle better. But second of all, trial, like, we did a pilot with Delhi Market, and, we put cans and bottles on there, and it drove our bottle sales by 93% increase, right? And the reason is that our cans are the sort of perfect serve. There's soda and orange already in there. So everyone knows that, okay, this bottle is 20 of these. Yeah. And we haven't tried to innovate and do loads of different flavors and lots of different SKUs. The whole kind of strategy has been, let's drive people to the bottle, but let's use the can format as a way to drive trial. And I don't want to confuse people with lots of different SKUs and flavors, and we're constantly being asked whether we're going to do that. And the answer is no. We want to have a very, very strategic, very clear, very simple strategy, which is this Botivo soda and orange. This is the bottle version, this is the can version, and you can get 20 of those in here.
Yeah.
Also,
That's
thirdly,
great.
it also allows us to move into completely new distribution spaces.
Yeah.
So, we're actually launching in Waitrose and Ocado, which are spaces that our bottler are in, but we're also going to be launching in other places that I can't announce yet, which would never accept a bottle format because they have cans. Also,
independence, perhaps.
Independence.
So that
festivals,
literally is
events.
driving inclusivity, right? Because of distribution and
cafes,
and RTDs are really nice price point for trials.
Exactly.
We see that with beer. People come into the shop and they treat it like a pick and mix. No one ever. People can taste lots of things in our tasting room, but they never ask to taste beer, really, because they all go, well, it's only £2.50 a can, so I'm going to just try some and see what I like. And they are more likely to have tried some of the brands anyway. But people do want to try the wines. They do want to try the spirits because they want to make sure they're making the right decision before purchase.
Yeah. And obviously, the rise of Buzzballs is hugely been driven by the format in particular, and
it's the alco pops of this generation,
and the ABV percentage. Yeah, I mean, reconcile that, Laura, in your mind, from a consumer perspective of why has Buzzball been so popular?
Oh, well, I haven't really given it that much thought, but I suspect it looks interesting. It's, I see them littered across the street. So it's definitely not something people are drinking in the pub and bar. They're drinking it in the summer when they're hanging out. So it's a really easy format. And you'll see that in the small moth cocktails as well. People like that idea of a really perfect thing in a smaller format that they can take anywhere. So, and I think RTDs have often been, the UK market is often slow to adopt RTDs, whereas in America it's a far bigger part of the market. Yeah. And I think maybe that might be shifting. Yeah.
It's got, again, not to be boring, it's driven by economics. £4 for 13.5% espresso martini. It's good value.
That is true. It is good. And those are actually delicious.
They are delicious, actually. We have some in our office. Last couple of points. And I guess, thinking, if you're some of the bigger companies that we've mentioned today, a Diageo, a Bacardi, a Suntory, someone like that. What would your advice be to leverage this space, or to help this space, or to understand this space? But I'm not asking you to paint their strategy, but what advice would you give them to help them get their mindset into it and kind of work out how to get into the space in kind of more successful ways than maybe they've tried?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I talk about sort of marketing and the non-alcoholic space, I think when you normally do marketing, there's normally the first phase of marketing, which is awareness, right? And it's like, go out there and make sure that everyone knows about your brand. And a lot of the big brands already have that, obviously, because they're working with their big brands. But actually, in the non-alcoholic space, there's a whole phase before awareness, which is credibility, basically. And I think because so many people have been burnt in the past by products that, weren't quite there yet when the category was in its infancy, there's a whole job that needs to be done. And they can't just lean on big brands, that were maybe quality in the alcoholic space to have credibility in the non-alcoholic space. So for me, it would be like, how do you spend a long time before you just lean into your existing brands to build credibility of a particular liquid? So talking to food critics, sommeliers, getting actual people who care about the liquid quality and going out there and shouting about that first, rather than just jumping onto a brand and assuming that people are going to think that quality in an alcoholic drink will mean quality in a non-alcoholic
and just
drink.
thinking, got to make it
Well,
non-alc.
it depends how you determine the quality of the alcoholic version as well, surely. But anyway.
But I guess what I mean is that if consumers are like, I don't know, this is not I probably would never think this, but let's say Captain Morgan is a quality product, doesn't mean that they're going to think the non-alcoholic version is quality. Yeah. I'm not saying it.
No, you're right.
But they need to work harder for that.
Believe craft, story, authenticity is a huge lever in non-alc drinks, right? Because I think that's missing.
Yeah.
I really do. There's not many companies or brands pursuing that idea of craft and kind of methodical nature of building liquid in non-alc.
No, 100%.
Yeah,
that for me,
people do like brand extensions, and it's some first experiences of alcohol free. But we do know that if I had this conversation with a journalist in Berlin, actually, she goes, well, I don't like these liquids. I said, well, I don't think you like every alcoholic drink, do you? She went, no. I said, so why wouldn't write off the whole of the alcohol category? So don't write off everything that's alcohol free because there's so much variety within it. But somehow she could not compute this fact.
It's like Campari, like 50% of people don't like Campari, right? Like it's just not for them. And then people are sometimes like, is Botivo not really polarizing? I'm like, no, it's not. Like,
it's just the same as any other drink.
It's like whiskey. It's like everything.
What I see within the big companies is there's a lack of NPD from where I'm sitting. So there may be lots going on in the background, but I don't quite know. And sometimes when a company's got hold of a brand, so you've got AG Bar who bought Strike, and you've got Cedars were bought by Pernod Ricard, they seem to just mothball them and have done nothing with them, not evolved that product or put anything in to replace it. It's very confusing. They'll talk about the fact that it's a category they're interested in, but they don't seem to know where they're going.
Yeah.
But they have, a really important role. They have access to the distribution channels. You can see that through, Diageo and their brand extensions. And Guinness has been such a great success that when you do get it right, it can really work well and it can elevate the whole of the category. So, the potential is still really huge. I think leaning into functional ingredients, I think will be something that those companies will begin to look at and how they can
100%.
use those. The fact that tobacco is now into functional drinks, it shows you that there's a market and that if you've got the distribution right, you can probably do quite well. But the consumer's still looking for interesting, tasty drinks and taste still has to be the driver.
And it's changing state, from a functional perspective. That's what you're talking about, changing your headspace, you relaxing, CBD,
and I mean, it's funny because consumers, we've got research coming out on functional from the Functional Drinks Collective, but the Functional Collective shows that there's two popular need states. One is for energy and the other is for relaxation and sleep. And so it's really interesting that how we begin to look at those and where that digestif moment, and we sell a ton of 3-spirit nightcap, for example, because it replaces that whiskey moment. It doesn't taste like whiskey, but it's that digestif moment and that need state. And so I think we'll begin to see some of that happen. I would, as always, my mantra is that I need the large alcoholic brands that have got brand extensions to work with us to help, lobby and grow the category, they are an important part of the mix, and and it benefits everyone if they do. And I've got some very clear ideas on how we need to move forward as a category, and how we begin to make sure that the government does some of the things that it needs to do to support the category more. And it's opened the door to that. It said we want to support the growth of low and no more in the UK. So it's up to me and Imme and everyone else to try and set that agenda.
Yeah, it's not startups versus big brands, right?
No.
I think that's really important.
It is and it isn't.
It is. I would say that in many ways it is. I think, well, I talk about this quite a lot, but like hospitality is in such a tricky position right now that actually what we're starting to see, which worries me, and particularly for the future of non-alcoholic independent brands, is that, with, VAT pressure and, like workforce, like salaries going up, all the different price pressures on hospitality. What we were seeing was, a few years ago, taking on listing fees from the big brands was a kind of bonus where you could do cool stuff in your bar or your restaurant. But what we're seeing now is, because honestly, like everyone is struggling to keep the lights on. Like people don't understand outside hospitality how much of a crisis it is. They are being forced to bring on, the listing fees of the big groups. And what that means is they have to have exclusivity. And what that means is actually, unless you are a chain or a restaurant group that really like values independent brands and wants to support and champion us, most of them are being forced just to go to the big guys, and that is really dangerous for the future of non-alcoholic spirits, or drinks, not even beer, because if every single non-alcoholic drink experience and menu is the same, and the quality and the variety isn't there, which is what drives excitement within a category and elevates it, then we have a real problem for the future.
And that's the same in retail as well. So when money buys space, it ekes out variety and difference, and it gives consumers less choice. And then they all go, well, I tried an alcohol-free thing and I didn't like it, and so they all must be terrible. So that's the cycle that we're in at the minute, and it is really difficult for hospitality and small retail.
Yeah, it's a bit. I can see it's a fight, right? Like it's a bit of a fight, but at the same time, I guess from consumers will seek and eke out the best and the highest quality and the most innovative and the most exciting.
Some consumers
and
will.
I know there are barriers to that. But
there's not. But if there aren't options on the menu for them to do that and discover it, where they're going to discover it, I think for those big brands out there, I think what they should be doing is actually working out how they can also work with independent brands in their drinks. Like if they want to take over the menus 100%, fine. But then how are you mixing in like a Botivo or Three Spirits or whatever it might be with your portfolio? Because creating a whole diverse group of drinks that are really tasty is beneficial for everybody.
So that's the message from you, I guess, to them, right? Like lean in and everyone wins, rather than
100%. Like what is that expression? I always get it wrong. Like the rising tide
lifts all boats.
Lifts all boats. Yeah. Like
and it's true, and it's so alien for large brands to work in that way. But then it's alien for them to work out how to sell not alcohol, because obviously alcohol largely sells itself. So this has been a challenge for them anyway to sell their alcohol-free products. They do need to think differently and work differently. We did a session in the conference last year on how big and small brands can work together to challenge that. But it does mean that they just have to give up a little bit of the space that they are busily using their financial might to acquire to look at what that diverse range is. And then we can all learn from that as well. So there's some benefits for them in that too.
Yeah, it's a mindset shift, isn't it? But I think it's a pretty interesting one. And particularly when you look at some of the data from those big companies, I think a mindset shift is probably something that they're trying to get to as well, because some of their data isn't particularly strong.
If you look at the data that's coming out of supermarkets, it is independent brands outselling them.
100%, particularly from a category growth perspective, right? Market
100%.
shares might be tiny, but category growth,
but
incrementality.
That regularity of drinking at home still has got a way to go compared to other types of product. And so that's a challenge that we all need to tackle together. Yeah, no,
it's amazingly kind of interesting consumer dynamics. Luis, any kind of last thoughts from you? Particularly functional. I think you had a point.
Yeah. So I think if I had to give an advice to the big guys, of course, we work with all of them. I think sometimes I feel the industry is a bit stuck on alcohol only, and I think to the point of functionality, those lines are very blurred nowadays. So my advice would be always to understand what's the competitive set these days. It's not so much alcohol or no alcoholic version of your vodka or your whiskey. Actually, something like the brand Strip with CBD. This is a competitor of alcohol. It gives exactly the same. plays in very similar places where alcohol is so dominant. And nowadays I think it's the fastest growing brand in the UK. It's, according to them, the only brand present in the 12 retailers. Yeah. But really understanding that the competition is not anymore, Diageo versus Pernod versus, but actually there's, it's much more broad than that nowadays. You have Coca-Cola investing on RTDs. And I think what's happening now with functionality is really interesting. You have things with ashwagandha infused that give you the same relaxation that alcohol gives you.
Yeah,
also,
taps into the need.
Exactly. The no alcohol beer Collider. I don't know if you familiarize.
Collider. Yeah,
it's so clever how it was done. Well, it's done in design. Even the so they have, I think, lion's mane, ashwagandha, and L-theanine. So it gives you a lot of the effects that alcohol give you, according to them. Probably not to the same extent, not to the same with the same strength.
It's not the same. They have ingredients that do similar things.
You need the setting and the bar and the atmosphere, right? For sure, with all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's about the perceived value by the consumer, and if 100%. They feel that there are ingredients that do something for them, even if it just make them healthier.
Yeah, 100%. That it's all about in the end, you need to listen to the consumer and what is.
Yeah, with more education around these ingredients, I guess it will also add like legitimacy.
Right, that is all we have time for. A couple of big takeouts for me. Firstly, economics is certainly the driver. We can talk about health, we can talk about values, we can talk about social media, but it's economics that is actually the driver of this consumer dynamic situation that we're in. There are big generational differences that we've talked about and we can unpick, but there are also life stage differences as well. As more younger consumers get more money from a purchasing perspective, they will buy more alcohol. That is a certainty. But what they buy away from just alcohol is where the conversation's been, and it's really interesting. Socializing is shifting, and actually it's dwarfing the alcohol versus non-alc debate, isn't it? It's actually about the liquid, the craft, the story behind it, what Imme said really well from Botivo's story. Why Guinness 0.0 has done so well is because of the craft and the quality of the liquid. Again, so there's real evidence to suggest leaning into authentic provenance liquid stories within non-alc can really work, and we've started to see that. So craft is a great way in. But effectively, beyond the headlines, the category is still small. As we said, globally, it's 1.5% versus alcohol, that's non-alc. But it's starting to see beyond that. It's starting to see what happens when potentially big and small brands might work together a little bit to create really interesting dynamics across menus from a hospitality perspective. And it's also working out what the future might be from a functional perspective as well. So loads of great stuff that we've talked about, some really interesting bits and pieces. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for listening.